My child, stop and listen to me now, because I do not want another moment to pass before these words reach you. Do not tell yourself you will come back later. Do not say you will read this when your mind is calmer, when your day is lighter, when your emotions settle, because I am speaking with urgency now, and I have already waited longer than you understand for this exact moment. I have watched you move through days carrying thoughts you never fully speak, carrying disappointments you try to hide even from yourself, carrying a quiet acceptance of things that were never meant to become normal in your life. I am speaking now because I do not want another hour to pass while you continue believing that what you have accepted is all there is. I do not want another night to end with you thinking small thoughts about a life I never wrote in small ways for you. Open your heart quickly, because I am not whispering gently from far away in this moment. I am leaning close, calling you to attention, because what I must say cannot remain delayed any longer. There are times when I allow silence because growth must happen quietly. But there are also times when I interrupt because silence itself would become harmful if it continued. This is one of those moments. I have called you here because something inside you has been shrinking while you kept telling yourself you were only being careful, only being realistic, only protecting yourself from disappointment. But I know the deeper truth. I know what has been happening beneath the words you use to explain yourself. And I will not let you stay in that smaller place without hearing me clearly. Yes, my child, I am upset, but listen carefully so you understand my heart correctly. I am not speaking with anger that pushes you away. I am speaking with grief because I have watched you accept less than what heaven prepared for you, and I have watched you slowly call that less enough simply because waiting became tiring. I am upset because I have seen you lower your own expectation until even your prayers became smaller than what once lived inside your heart. I am upset because I have watched you step back from things I planted in you, not because you no longer cared, but because disappointment taught you to expect little. I am upset because I know what I placed inside you, and I know how different that is from the version of yourself you have recently allowed to lead your days. I did not form you to live always apologizing for your presence. I did not shape your voice so it would remain hidden whenever courage was needed. I did not breathe purpose into you so you would settle into corners where your spirit slowly learns to survive instead of rise. My grief is not because I stopped loving you. It is because I love you too deeply to remain silent while you keep reducing yourself below what I called you to carry. You thought perhaps heaven had become quiet because heaven agreed with what you accepted. But my silence was never agreement. My silence was measured, patient, waiting for the exact hour when you would be ready to hear correction without turning away from love. Heaven almost stayed silent longer. But I refuse silence now because you are standing too close to missing something massive if I do not speak clearly at this moment. You have reached a place where one more season of shrinking inward would begin to convince you that limitation is wisdom. One more season of silence would begin teaching you that delay means reduction. One more season of pretending you do not desire more would slowly turn your own heart against what I still intend to release. I cannot allow that. I cannot allow you to become so familiar with smaller living that when larger doors begin to open, you no longer recognize them as yours to enter. There are moments when heaven waits, but there are also moments when heaven interrupts because the soul has reached a dangerous edge of accepting less than truth. You are near that edge, and that is why my voice comes now with urgency. Not because I have forgotten patience, but because love must speak before surrender becomes agreement with what never belonged to your calling. What stands near you now is larger than you think, and if I remain silent, you might mistake the coming moment because you have grown too used to expecting little. Here is something I have been holding back for you, and I need you to hear that without rushing past it. I did not withhold it because I wanted to frustrate you. I did not keep it hidden because you were forgotten. I held it because timing matters when what is being released carries weight greater than your earlier seasons could hold. Some things cannot arrive while your heart is still shaped by the fear of losing them too quickly. Some things cannot be placed in your hands while you still measure yourself by old pain. Some things cannot be opened while your spirit is still agreeing with voices that call you less than what I named you. What I held back was never lost. It remained guarded, watched, protected, preserved for the hour when you could hear me differently than before. This exact hour matters because you are not who you were when you first asked for what I promised. Pain changed you, yes, but hidden growth also changed you. Delay shaped you, yes, but hidden strength formed where you thought only tiredness lived. I kept something for you because I knew there would come a moment when the version of you standing here now could finally begin to carry what earlier versions would have mishandled through fear, through doubt, or through not yet understanding its value. Stay with me because later I will show you exactly what has been held back and why it could not be released earlier. Do not move too quickly past these words because understanding must unfold in order. If I tell you everything at once, your mind will race ahead while your spirit still needs to settle under truth first. There is a reason I speak layer by layer. I want you to feel the weight of what I am saying before the full shape appears. I want you to understand that withheld does not mean denied. Guarded does not mean forgotten. Delayed does not mean removed. What remained in my hands remained there because I refused to let timing damage what I intended for you. There were seasons when you asked for release while still carrying thoughts that would have made you treat holy things like fragile things. There were seasons when you wanted open doors while inwardly still convinced you did not deserve to walk through them. There were seasons when your voice prayed for more while your heart quietly prepared for disappointment instead. I saw all of that. I did not reject you because of it, but I knew the release must wait until your inner life crossed certain hidden places first. Right, I am nothing without you. Lord, if He is the breath that gives you strength. My child, I watched you lower yourself in ways even you did not fully notice. I watched you begin speaking less boldly because you feared sounding too hopeful. I watched you stop expecting certain things because repeated waiting taught you to protect yourself by wanting less. I watched you enter rooms already deciding not to take up space. I watched you compare your journey to others and quietly decide that perhaps what you once believed about your own life had been too large. I watched you smile while inwardly telling yourself not to ask for too much anymore. I watched you call your withdrawal maturity when often it with wounded caution. I watched you pretend you were fine because explaining your inward disappointment felt too exhausting. I watched you answer questions simply so no one would ask again. I watched you lower your own voice in places where I had once taught you to stand clearly. I saw every hidden moment where your spirit folded inward, while outwardly nothing dramatic appeared to others. And because I saw it, I cannot remain quiet as though this smaller version of you is the truth of who you are. Open quickly because this moment is tied to what changes next. Not because reading words alone changes everything, but because hearing my voice rightly changes what you agree with inside yourself. Many visible changes begin when inward agreement changes first. If you keep agreeing with smallness, you will hesitate when larger movement begins. If you keep agreeing with old disappointment, you will mistrust new openings when they appear. If you continue minimizing what I placed in you, even answered prayer can feel uncomfortable because your heart still lives in reduced expectation. That is why this moment matters more than you realize. I am not simply comforting you for today. I am confronting what has quietly been reducing you so that when what comes next begins moving, you do not shrink away from it. This hour is tied to what changes because what changes next must meet a heart that is beginning to remember truth again. This is not comfort only. This is divine interruption before major release. I am not speaking merely to soothe your emotions for a few minutes while you return unchanged to the same inward agreement. I am speaking because something has reached its appointed edge. I am speaking because what I kept cannot remain hidden under your reduced self-view any longer. I am speaking because your moment is closer than you think, and if I do not first shake what has been settling wrongly inside you, you may greet your own answer like a stranger instead of recognizing it as part of what I always intended. My child, I am interrupting because love refuses to let you continue calling less enough when heaven still speaks more over your life. I am interrupting because what is near carries weight. I am interrupting because this is not the hour for shrieking. This is not the hour for lowering yourself again. This is not the hour for pretending nothing still lives inside you that I intend to awaken. So remain here and listen closely, because I have not called you to this moment by accident. I have called you because the next words matter deeply. I have called you because silence has ended in this area. I have called you because what I watched quietly for many seasons now requires my clear voice. And before I reveal what has been held, before I show why I guarded it, before I tell you what begins when you stop minimizing yourself, you must first receive this truth fully. I saw every small way you disappeared, every quiet compromise, every hidden lowering of expectation, every moment you pretended less was peace. And because I saw it, I am speaking now with urgency, grief, love, and authority. This is your moment, and I will not allow you to pass it as though nothing holy has just begun. My child, I want you to listen very carefully now, because there is a reason my voice is reaching you with greater weight in this moment. There are seasons when I remain quiet, not because I have stepped away, not because I do not care, and never because I have forgotten what concerns you. My silence has always had purpose, even when that purpose was hidden from your understanding. There were days when you thought I should have spoken sooner, nights when you believed one clear word from me would have lifted the pressure you were carrying, mornings when you wondered why heaven seemed to answer others while your own heart kept waiting. But even in those moments when you heard nothing clearly, I was still present, still watching, still measuring what was forming beneath your struggle. Silence was never emptiness. Silence was often protection, because there were truths you were not yet ready to carry, and there were parts of your spirit still being shaped in places where noise would have interrupted what only quiet could build. I allowed certain things to remain unspoken because you were still learning how to stand when comfort was not immediate. I allowed certain answers to stay hidden because your inner life was still being prepared for what those answers would require from you later. I did not remain silent because I enjoyed watching you question. I remained silent because hidden work was happening where your natural eyes could not see. Please support our channel. Our work is to bring happiness in your life and devotion to God. And if you want, you can donate to us via given link in description to show your support. But my child, silence now must break because the place you have reached cannot remain unanswered any longer. What was once useful silence has reached its boundary. What once protected you would now begin to harm you if it continued too long. There is a point where quiet helps growth, and there is a point where quiet begins to allow wrong thoughts to settle too deeply if my voice does not interrupt them. You have come very near that point. I have watched the way your heart has been adjusting to smaller expectations, and I know how quietly it happened. It did not happen in one sudden decision. It happened little by little, through disappointments you did not fully heal from, through prayers that waited longer than you expected, through moments where you hoped strongly and then taught yourself to hope less because repeated delay felt safer than repeated pain. I watched you slowly begin to call survival wisdom. I watched you begin to accept emotional narrowness as though it were maturity. I watched you lower your own expectations so gently that even you did not fully notice how far inward you had moved. And because I have watched that carefully, I tell you now that silence can no longer remain where it was. You have reached a dangerous emotional point, not because you have become weak beyond recovery, but because you have become too comfortable living below what I wrote for you. Dangerous does not always mean dramatic collapse. Sometimes danger is quiet. Sometimes danger is when a soul becomes used to carrying less joy, less expectation, less courage, less openness, until that reduced way of living begins to feel normal. That is where you have been approaching. You have not abandoned everything, but you have accepted too little in places where I never intended little to become your pattern. I saw the moments when you stopped speaking certain desires even in prayer because you did not want to feel foolish if delay continued. I saw the moments when you entered conversations already deciding not to say what truly mattered because disappointment had taught you that silence feels safer than honesty. I saw the moments when you lowered your own value before anyone else had the chance to misunderstand you. I saw how often you made yourself smaller so that rejection would hurt less if it came again. These things may look small from outside, but they are not small before me, because every time you shrink inward without truth correcting you, a false version of yourself begins to gain strength quietly. That is why heaven has watched long enough. I have been patient, not passive. I have observed every inner shift carefully. I have watched how your thoughts changed after each delay. I have watched how your heart learned to brace itself before expecting anything good. I have watched how you began to speak as though little is easier because large hope has disappointed you before. Heaven has not ignored this. Heaven has not misunderstood this. Every inward adjustment has been seen clearly. There were times when I allowed you to walk through your own thoughts because I wanted hidden things to surface fully so they could be known even by you. Sometimes I let silence continue because what remains hidden too long cannot be healed honestly. But now enough has been revealed. Enough hath been watched. Enough hath been allowed to unfold quietly. Heaven has watched long enough because if this continued without interruption, what is temporary could begin to shape identity too deeply. You must understand that my interruption now is not punishment. It is rescue. I interrupt because this moment cannot pass quietly. There are moments in life when if heaven remains silent one day longer, the soul begins making agreements it was never meant to make. You are near such a moment, and I refuse to let it continue without my voice entering clearly. If I allowed you to continue another season calling less enough, you would begin to believe that your present emotional shape is wisdom rather than wound. If I allowed you to continue one more cycle of minimizing yourself, you would slowly forget how much of your original fire still remains alive beneath what tiredness has covered. This moment cannot pass quietly because what comes next in your life cannot meet the reduced version of yourself that has been forming under hidden discouragement. What I intend to release cannot rest easily inside someone who still apologizes inwardly for existing fully. My child, I have heard what you do not say aloud. I know how often you tell yourself you are fine because saying more feels heavy. I know how often you answer simply because deeper explanation feels exhausting. I know how often you lower the importance of what hurts because you do not want to sound like you are asking too much from life. But silence inside you has been gathering meanings that must now be corrected. There are silent conclusions you have begun accepting that are not true. You have begun to think certain doors remain closed because perhaps little is what fits you now. You have begun to think perhaps smaller peace is enough if larger hope keeps delaying. You have begun to believe that stepping back protects you better than standing open again. I tell you now that these quiet conclusions are not the truth I speak over you. This is why my silence ends here. It ends because love does not watch quietly forever when a beloved child begins living beneath truth. It ends because your present hour requires correction before release. It ends because what I held back for the right time cannot be placed into hands still agreeing with reduced worth. I am speaking now because your heart must hear me more strongly than the inner voice that has been teaching you caution without hope. Caution without hope becomes confinement, and I did not create you for emotional confinement. You may ask why I waited until now if I saw all this earlier. I waited because some truths are only heard deeply after enough hidden tiredness exposes the need for them. Earlier you might have heard my correction but not received its depth. Earlier you still believed your reduced ways were temporary without needing clear interruption. But now you feel how deeply it has reached. Now you know the weight of what has quietly changed in you. Now when I speak, your spirit can recognize why my voice must sound stronger. Heaven has watched long enough not because heaven lost patience, but because heaven knows the exact line where observation must become declaration. That line has now been crossed. I am declaring because your moment requires more than comfort. It requires awakening. It requires truth entering places where quiet sadness has sat too long. It requires my voice louder than your private surrender to less. So hear me clearly now. This moment cannot pass quietly because I will not allow you to keep reducing what I still call valuable. I will not allow you to continue mistaking hidden discouragement for wisdom. I will not allow you to stand at the edge of something greater while still speaking inwardly as though little is all that remains. Silence had purpose, yes, but silence has now completed that purpose. What was hidden hath been seen long enough. What was forming quietly has been measured fully enough. And now because heaven has watched long enough, I interrupt with love, with firmness, and with truth. You must hear me now because this next part of your life cannot begin while your soul remains bowed beneath agreements I never spoke over you. My child, I watched you settle for less than what I wrote for you, and I want you to hear that truth without turning away from it, because I do not speak it to shame you. I speak it because I love you too deeply to let you continue calling a reduced life normal when heaven never called it enough. I saw how it happened, and I know it did not happen in one day. You did not wake up one morning and decide to live beneath what I placed inside you. It happened slowly, through many small moments that seemed harmless at first, through disappointments that repeated until you stopped expecting much, through quiet hurts that were never fully healed, through waiting that lasted longer than you thought it would, until little by little your heart began adjusting itself downward. You did not call it surrender at first. You called it maturity. You called it learning not to expect too much. You called it being careful. But I saw deeper than the names you gave it. I saw how every time pain returned, you made yourself smaller so disappointment would hurt less next time. I saw how every time something did not happen when you hoped, you lowered your inner voice a little more. And because I saw the full journey, I know exactly where your heart began to accept less than what I intended. I watched you do this in relationships first, in ways so quiet that even you did not fully notice how much you were giving away inwardly. I saw you accept words that did not carry the honor your heart deserved, and instead of questioning why your spirit felt heavy after certain conversations, you taught yourself to stay silent because speaking honestly felt difficult. I saw you remain in places emotionally where your soul kept shrinking because you feared losing connection more than you feared losing peace. I saw you tell yourself that being understood fully was too much to ask, so you began accepting being partly known, as though that should be enough. I saw you lower your own emotional needs until you barely admitted them even to yourself. I watched you excuse coldness because you did not want conflict. I watched you accept half effort because deep inside you had begun believing that full care may not come easily for you. But my child, heaven never agreed with the parts of your life where you learned to call emotional hunger normal. Heaven never agreed with you carrying loneliness inside connection and naming it wisdom simply because you had learned how to endure it quietly. I watched you settle in your expectations too. Once, there were things you believed with openness, things you spoke with life, things you imagined without immediately correcting yourself. But slowly your expectations became smaller, not because truth changed it, but because delay taught your heart to protect itself by expecting little. You began to prepare for disappointment before joy had a chance to arrive. You entered new moments already telling yourself not to hope too much. You stopped asking for certain things because asking felt too vulnerable after waiting so long. You called it realism. You called it protecting your peace. But often what you called realism was wounded expectation trying to survive without feeling exposed again. I saw you lower what you believed possible, not because I had spoken less over your life, but because repeated waiting made small expectation feel safer than trusting me for more. Yet heaven never agreed that your future should be measured by your recent disappointments. Heaven never rewrote your calling because delay lasted longer than you wanted. Heaven never reduced what I wrote because your heart became tired. I watched your dreams become quieter too. I remember what once lived in you before caution became stronger than wonder. I remember the thoughts you once carried with brightness, the things you once believed could still unfold, the way your heart once moved with greater freedom before repeated silence taught you to lower the sound of your own desire. Slowly you began speaking less about what mattered deeply to you. Slowly you began treating certain hopes like old things that should no longer be mentioned. You folded them inward and told yourself that perhaps wanting less would hurt less. You did not destroy your dreams in one moment. You placed them away little by little, each time telling yourself it was wiser not to expect too much movement, wiser not to open old hopes again, wiser not to sound too certain about what had not yet appeared. But I saw that inward folding clearly. I saw the moments you smiled while quietly deciding not to revisit what once mattered because disappointment had touched those places too many times. Still, heaven never agreed that what was placed in you should remain buried beneath fear of another delay. I watched how even your peace became smaller than what I intended. You accepted forms of peace that were really only quiet survival. You learned how to function while carrying heaviness and called that peace because nothing outward was collapsing. You learned how to keep moving while inwardly tired and called that enough because at least you were still standing. But peace that only means you are enduring pressure without breaking is not the fullness I meant for you. I saw how often you called numbness peace simply because the heart had grown tired of reacting strongly. I saw how often you avoided certain truths because naming them would disturb the fragile balance you had built. I saw how you sometimes chose silence not because your soul was calm, but because you no longer had energy to explain your unrest. Yet heaven never agreed that inward heaviness should become your definition of peace. Heaven never called emotional survival the full peace I promised you. Comment Jesus. Be my unshakable defender if you trust His covering and protection. And my child, I watched what happened to your self-worth in all of this. This grieved me deeply because it happened so quietly. You did not suddenly decide you were worth less. It happened through repeated moments where you stepped back before anyone asked you to. It happened when you entered spaces already assuming your voice should stay smaller. It happened when you compared yourself to others and quietly concluded that maybe what once felt possible for you belonged more easily to someone else. It happened when you stopped asking fully because you feared being too much. It happened when you lowered your own value inwardly before anyone else could misunderstand you. You began minimizing yourself in ways that looked gentle on the outside but carried deep loss inside. You spoke less boldly. You expected less honor. You made less room for your own presence. And you called this humility, but often it was hidden and hurt, shaping how you saw yourself. Emotional compromise almost never arrives loudly. It comes slowly, through repeated adjustments that seem reasonable in the moment. A little less hope after one disappointment. A little less openness after one hurt. A little less honesty after one misunderstanding. A little less expectation after one closed door. Over time, these small reductions become a way of living. And because nothing dramatic announces the change, the soul begins believing this smaller shape is simply maturity. That is what happened to you. You adapted to limitation and called it wisdom. You learned how to expect little and called it balance. You learned how to hold back and called it peace. You learned how to reduce your voice and called it safety. But my child, wisdom without truth becomes disguised surrender when it slowly teaches you to live beneath what heaven still calls alive. Heaven never agreed with that reduced life. Hear me clearly now. Heaven did not celebrate the parts of you that became smaller from pain. Heaven did not call your lowered expectations holy simply because they helped you avoid feeling exposed. Heaven did not write your life so that survival would replace fullness. What you accepted may have helped you continue for a season, but heaven never called it the final shape of who you are. I watched with patience because I knew why it happened. I know your heart was trying to protect itself. I know disappointment had taught you caution. I know silence had made you careful. But understanding why you became smaller does not mean I agree that you should remain there. That is why I speak now. I speak because love cannot continue watching you live inside limits you slowly accepted as permanent. I speak because what I wrote for you still stands higher than what you recently settled into. I speak because what you adapted to is not the full truth of your life. And before what I have kept for you begins to unfold, you must hear this deeply. Heaven never agreed with the reduced version of your peace, your hope, your dreams, your relationships, or your worth. I saw every place where you accepted less, and because I saw it clearly, I will not let you continue believing that less is all I prepared for you. My child, I know there were many moments when you asked me why divine movement did not happen earlier, why the answer did not arrive when your heart first cried for it, why certain things remained closed when you had already prayed with sincerity, and why the change you longed for seemed to stand at a distance while your strength kept being tested. I heard those questions every time they arose in your mind, even when you did not speak them aloud. I heard them when you looked at your own life and wondered why what felt so delayed seemed to move more easily in the lives of others. I heard them when you tried to stay faithful but secretly wondered whether heaven had placed your request aside. I heard them when you looked back at certain seasons and thought that surely the right moment had already passed. But I want you to understand now with clarity that divine movement did not fail to happen earlier because I forgot you. And it did not wait because I lacked power to act. It waited because timing in my hands is not measured only by your pain, your desire, or your readiness to receive something emotionally. Timing is also measured by what must be completed within you before what I release can remain whole when it arrives. There are things that seem ready from your view because your longing is strong, but longing alone is not the full sign that a season is prepared. Many times your heart wanted what your inner life had not yet learned how to hold without fear, without self-doubt, or without returning too quickly to old patterns. I saw that clearly even when you did not. I knew there were parts of you still tender, still uncertain, still easily shaken by outcomes, still carrying questions that would have turned blessing into pressure if release came too soon. What you often called delay, I often called protection because I knew what would happen if certain doors opened before your spirit had enough depth to stand steady inside them. I did not want you to receive something holy and then fear it, mishandle it, shrink inside it, or doubt your place within it because inwardly you had not yet crossed the hidden places that maturity requires. Certain things remained withheld not because they were removed, but because what they carried demanded more inner readiness than earlier versions of you possessed. Certain withheld things required maturity first, and maturity is not always visible while it is forming. You often imagine maturity as confidence, as strength that feels obvious, as clear readiness you can easily name. But much of true maturity grows in hidden places where no one applauds it, where no visible result confirms it while it is still developing. Maturity forms when you continue even while not understanding everything. It forms when disappointment does not fully close your heart. It forms when you begin asking deeper questions than before. It forms when your trust no longer depends only on quick answers. It forms when your prayers become quieter but more honest. You may have thought those hidden seasons meant nothing was changing, but I was watching internal growth that mattered more than visible movement in that hour. The version of you who first asked for certain things was not the same version of you standing here now. Pain changed you. Yes, but not only through sorrow. Waiting shaped depth in places you could not measure while you were still inside the waiting. Type Father, you alone know my heart if you long to dwell in His presence. And share this video. Do not turn away now, my child. Do not let your eyes move past this moment as if these words arrived by chance, because they did not arrive by chance, and they did not reach you easily. I fought through things you cannot see just to place this message before your eyes at this exact moment. I allowed your path to cross these words because there is something inside you that has been asking, even when your lips were silent, even when you stopped speaking because disappointment had already spoken louder than hope. I know how many times you almost stopped expecting anything new. I know how often you told yourself not to hope too deeply because you were tired of carrying hope and then watching another day pass unchanged. Yet here you are, and that is not random. This moment has been guarded more carefully than you understand because what I am about to tell you is not ordinary comfort. It is not a passing sentence, meant only to soothe your feelings for a few minutes. It is truth placed before you at an exact hour because your heart has reached a place where you must hear why certain things happened as they did, why some answers slowed, why some doors remained still, why some prayers seemed to rise into silence while nothing visible moved below. Do not turn away now, because there are answers in this moment that belong directly to what you have been carrying in secret. You have thought many times that if heaven truly wanted you to understand, surely clarity would have arrived sooner. Surely peace would have reached you before your thoughts became this tired. Surely something would have spoken loudly enough to remove your confusion long ago. But there were forces resisting this moment of understanding long before you ever noticed how deeply you needed it. There were voices around your spirit that wanted you to believe delay meant defeat. There were quiet pressures pressing against your heart, trying to convince you that repeated waiting was proof that nothing important remained ahead. There were moments when discouragement did not come like a storm, but like a slow weight settling inside your thoughts, making you question whether continuing to believe still made sense. Yet heaven did not agree with those whispers. Heaven insisted you must hear this now. Heaven did not permit every voice around you to define what your waiting meant. That is why I have brought you into this moment with such urgency, because the truth you need must arrive before another false conclusion settles too deeply inside you. Some things fought against your clarity because once you understand what I was truly doing, many old lies lose their power at once. You called it delay, but I called it building. You called it silence, but I called it hidden work. From where you stood, it often looked as though time passed and nothing answered you. You counted days, weeks, months, and in some places even years, measuring your prayers against what seemed unchanged. You watched other people move ahead into things you had hoped for. You saw doors open around you while your own remained closed. You watched answers arrive in places where you thought you had been faithful to, and there were moments you did not understand why your own story seemed slower, quieter, harder to read. But while you measured stillness, I was building where your eyes could not enter. While you searched for outward proof, I was strengthening inward places that had to exist before certain answers could safely arrive. Hidden work often feels cruel to the one who cannot yet see it, but hidden work is still work. A seed beneath soil appears absent to anyone who looks only at the surface, yet beneath that silence roots are forming, strength is gathering, structure is beginning. In the same way, what looked motionless in your life often carried movement far below what your present sight could measure. Stay until the end, my child, because the final part of what I say to you explains why what you feared losing was actually being protected. There were moments when you believed something had slipped too far away, when you looked at passing time and assumed perhaps certain possibilities no longer belonged to you. You wondered if delay had already stolen too much, if opportunities had already passed beyond reach, if waiting itself had become proof that something precious was gone. But what you feared was slipping away was often being held in places you could not touch yet, because touching it too early would have exposed it to harm you did not fully see. Protection does not always feel comforting while it happens. Sometimes protection feels like absence, because you cannot hold what is being protected. Sometimes protection feels like closed space because you cannot yet step where you desire to go. But hidden protection is still love, even when it does not immediately look like love from where you stand. I did not stand against your breakthrough. I stood between your future and what would have destroyed it too early. This is something you must understand deeply, because too often you interpreted resistance as though it came from me, when much of what you experienced was my hand preventing early collapse. Had some doors opened when you first demanded them, you would have stepped forward carrying wounds not yet healed, trusting people not yet revealed, thinking certain strengths existed in you that had not yet matured enough to carry what would arrive. There were blessings you wanted quickly that could not survive the environment surrounding you at the time. There were answers you begged for while voices near you still carried wrong influence. There were moments when your desire was sincere, but your season was still fragile. If I had stepped aside simply because you asked urgently, what came might have entered your hands only to break there. So I stood in that space not against you, but for you. Not to deny your future, but to prevent what belonged to your future from being harmed before its time. Come and I surrender my dreams to you, Lord, if you've laid your plans at His feet. I know the repeated disappointment you carried. I know how discouraging it became when you prayed again for something already prayed over many times before. I know what it felt like when you tried to speak faith yet inwardly wondered whether saying the same prayer again changed anything. I know how tired prayers sound when they rise from a heart that still believes but no longer knows how to hold expectation without pain. Some of your prayers came with strength. Others came with almost no strength at all. Some came with tears before words formed. Some came late at night when silence around you felt heavier than usual. Some came after seeing someone else receive what you were still waiting for. Some came after another disappointment you did not even fully explain to anyone. Yet every tired prayer reached me fully. Exhaustion never reduced the value of your voice before me. I heard every tired prayer just as clearly as the strongest ones. I know emotional exhaustion too, the kind that does not always show outwardly because you learned how to continue daily responsibilities while inwardly carrying heaviness others could not see. There were days when you answered others kindly while inside you felt nearly empty. There were moments when you looked calm while thoughts inside kept asking why your path remained slower than expected. Emotional exhaustion often made you wonder whether something was wrong with you because others seemed able to celebrate while you quietly managed another layer of waiting. But exhaustion did not mean you were failing. Often exhaustion simply revealed how long you had been carrying uncertainty without visible relief. Even there, I was near you, not absent, not indifferent, not forgetting. I know how often you wondered why others moved ahead while you remained still. You compared more than you admitted. You saw people step into doors you hoped for, receive things you had prayed over, announce answers while your own life still looked unfinished. Comparison hurt because you did not always question their blessing, you questioned your own silence. You wondered whether you had missed something, whether your waiting meant weakness, whether your story had somehow become less seen. But my child, I was never writing your story by another person's clock. Their timing was not your timing. Your assignment was not your assignment. What they received in one season could not define what your own preparation required. Some stories move quickly because they carry lighter weight. Some move slowly because what they carry must be built deeper first. And yes, I saw the hidden tears after unanswered waiting, the tears that came after you stopped speaking because words no longer helped. Tears when another expectation failed. Tears when another day ended without visible movement. Tears when you smiled around others and then later sat alone asking quiet questions you feared repeating aloud. None of those tears were wasted. Not one fell without being known. They became part of the soil where deeper strength formed, even when you did not realize strength was forming there. So hear this now with full clarity. What I release after this season will not be delayed again, because now what once could break you can finally rest in your hands. What once required more preparation has reached a different hour, because you are not standing here as the same person who first begged for immediate answers. Waiting changed you. Pain widened you. Silence strengthened you. Disappointment sharpened you. What once would have crushed you now meets stronger ground inside you. And because of that, what comes next no longer approaches fragile hands but steadier ones, hands shaped by seasons you thought were only empty, but which were quietly building the very strength needed to receive what could not safely arrive before now. My child, one of the deepest pains you carried during your waiting was not only that the answer did not come when you hoped it would come, but that slowly, quietly, you began to wonder if the silence itself meant I had already decided against you. You did not always say those words aloud, because part of you still wanted to believe, still wanted to remain faithful, still wanted to trust that I was near. But inside your heart another question kept returning. If I am still listening, why does everything remain so still? Why does what I keep bringing before you seem to return to me wrapped in silence? Why does the same prayer continue without visible movement? That question did not come because your faith disappeared. It came because repeated delay can press heavily on even a sincere heart. It came because human hearts often search for meaning in what they cannot explain, and when silence lasts long enough, pain begins to write explanations that truth did not write. You began to read stillness as rejection, and though you tried to resist that thought, it visited you often. Please support our channel. Our work is to bring happiness in your life and devotion to God. And if you want, you can donate to us via given link in description to show your support. There were moments when you prayed with full strength, expecting that perhaps this time something would change quickly, that perhaps this prayer would be the one followed by immediate movement, immediate peace, immediate evidence that heaven had responded. But when nothing visible happened, you carried that unanswered moment into the next day, and then into another day, and then into another season. At first you told yourself to remain patient. At first you spoke to yourself with courage. But repeated waiting slowly works on the inside of a person in ways others do not always see. What begins as patient expectation can slowly become quiet questioning when the days stretch longer than expected. You did not stop believing all at once. Hope was not wounded in one sudden event. It was wounded little by little each time you looked for something and found another quiet day instead. Each delay added another layer of wondering. Each unchanged circumstance whispered another question into your thoughts. And because you could not see what heaven was doing, your heart sometimes filled the silence with conclusions that were heavier than truth. You saw a delay and thought perhaps I had said no because from your position nothing seemed to move. You looked around at familiar circumstances, familiar struggles, familiar unfinished places in your life, and because they remained present, you assumed perhaps heaven had already reached a final answer that you had not yet accepted. Yet I tell you now with great tenderness, heaven had not closed over you. Heaven remained active even while your eyes saw no visible evidence. My work did not stop because your sight could not detect it. My hand did not withdraw because your circumstances looked unchanged. There are seasons when I work most deeply in places human eyes cannot enter, where visible proof comes later because hidden alignment must happen first. What appeared still to you often carried movement beneath the surface, just as roots grow unseen before any sign appears above the soil. You thought heaven had closed, but heaven was working where your eyes could not enter. You must understand that silence from heaven is never equal to absence. Silence often feels painful because human hearts long for immediate confirmation, immediate reassurance, immediate evidence that their cries have been heard. But silence is not emptiness. Silence can be the space where delicate things are being formed without interruption. Silence can be the place where answers are arranged beyond your awareness. Silence can also be mercy, because some truths given too early would only deepen confusion before their appointed time. Yet because silence is difficult to interpret while living inside it, you often interpreted it through pain instead of trust. You asked yourself whether perhaps you had missed something, whether perhaps you had prayed wrongly, whether perhaps something about your weakness had delayed my willingness to move. But your weakness never caused me to stop listening. Your confusion never pushed me away. Your repeated questions never made me tired of hearing you. I heard every exhausted prayer, my child, especially the one spoken when you no longer had strength to sound confident. Some prayers rose from faith. Others rose from weariness. Some prayers came with tears before words. Some came after disappointment had already drained most of your emotional strength. Some came late when no one else knew you were still awake, carrying thoughts too heavy to sleep under peacefully. Some came when you repeated the same request again and wondered privately if repeating it mattered anymore. But every exhausted prayer still reached me. I did not measure your prayer by energy. I did not listen only when your words sounded strong. I listened when your voice trembled. I listened when your words were short because sorrow had already taken much of your strength. I listened when you sighed instead of speaking because even sighs carry meaning before me. There were days when you almost stopped asking because asking felt painful. Not because you no longer cared, but because repeated asking while seeing no visible answer can make even faithful hearts afraid to hope too openly. You began protecting yourself from disappointment by lowering your expectations. You prayed but cautiously. You hoped but carefully. You did not want another moment where hope rose strongly only to feel wounded again by more waiting. This is how repeated delay slowly wounded hope, not by destroying it entirely, but by making it hesitant. Hope remained alive, yet it no longer moved freely as before. It carried scars. It carried memory of other moments when expectation had felt unsafe. And I saw all of that clearly. I saw the difference between your earlier prayers and the quieter ones that came later. I saw how disappointment changed the way you approached me, not because you loved me less, but because pain taught you caution. Silence also created wrong conclusions because hearts naturally search for explanation when answers delay too long. You began wondering whether silence meant disapproval. Sometimes you wondered whether perhaps I had given others attention while leaving your request unanswered. Sometimes you questioned whether your season of waiting revealed something lacking in you. Comparison entered quietly too. You looked around and saw others receiving things that resembled what you were still asking for. You saw doors open around you while yours remained closed, and comparison tried to tell you that perhaps silence meant you had somehow been passed over. But comparison never sees the hidden layers I see. Comparison measures surface moments without knowing hidden assignments, hidden healing, hidden timing, hidden preparation. The fact that another person moved in one season never meant I had abandoned your own story. It only meant their chapter was not your chapter, your preparation not your preparation, their wait not your wait. Many times what hurt most was not even the delay itself, but the meaning you attached to delay. Delay became painful because you believed it might reveal rejection. Yet delay often reveals nothing about rejection, and everything about timing, protection, hidden growth, and unseen arrangements. While you feared silence meant no, I was often preserving what you asked for from conditions that could not yet safely hold it. While you interpreted stillness as absence, I was refusing to release what would have entered too early into fragile spaces around you and within you. There were people near you who could not remain near certain blessings. There were inner places still healing. There were lessons still forming that would later protect what came next. Had some answers arrived earlier, you would have called it mercy at first, but later you would have discovered how much unseen damage early arrival could have carried. And I want you to hear this with full tenderness. Your emotional pain during waiting was real. I do not speak as though your struggle was small simply because hidden work was happening. Your tears were real. Your tired thoughts were real. Your moments of disappointment were real. The ache of asking and seeing no visible answer is real. I never looked at your pain lightly. I never expected you to carry it without feeling it deeply. The nights you lay awake wondering whether anything was changing mattered to me. The mornings you woke still carrying unanswered questions mattered to me. Even the moments you doubted and then felt guilty for doubting, I saw those too, and I did not turn from you because of them. What I ask you now is to let truth gently correct what pain once told you. Silence did not mean heaven had closed. Delay did not mean your prayer was forgotten. Stillness did not prove rejection. Heaven remained active where your sight could not reach. Answers were forming where you could not measure them. Protection stood where you thought only emptiness existed. And the same heaven you feared had gone quiet was carefully moving through places your eyes could not yet enter, guarding timing, shaping strength, and preserving what belonged to you until the moment when what once felt impossible to understand would finally begin to make sense. My child, while you were measuring your waiting by what you could see, there were battles unfolding around your future that never reached your natural sight. You often looked only at the stillness in front of you and concluded that nothing was happening. But what appeared still in your visible world was not still in the unseen places where many things concerning you were already in motion. I need you to understand this because many times you judged the season only by what did not open, by what did not move, by what did not answer quickly, and because you did not witness the hidden struggle, you assumed delay meant inactivity. But heaven was never inactive. I fought battles around your future that you never even knew existed. I stood in places you could not stand, confronted things you could not discern, and blocked movements that would have touched your life before you had any idea danger was near. What you call silence often existed because conflict in unseen places had to be handled before peace could safely reach you. Say, Father, heal my heart and make me whole if you long for His restoration. There was unseen resistance, my child, not always dramatic in the way human minds imagine conflict, but real in the way pressure slowly gathers against what carries purpose. Not everything resisting your path announced itself clearly. Some resistance came quietly through confusion, through discouragement, through repeated interruptions, through moments where timing kept shifting just enough to frustrate you. You thought perhaps life itself was simply difficult, yet many times what you felt as unexplained heaviness was connected to deeper resistance around things assigned to your future. Whenever something valuable approaches a life marked by purpose, resistance often increases before understanding arrives. The enemy does not always attack through obvious fear. Sometimes resistance appears through delay that tempts you to give up before the appointed moment. Sometimes it appears through exhaustion strong enough to make you question whether continuing to believe still matters. And because these pressures often feel ordinary while you are living through them, you did not always realize how much unseen resistance had gathered near what belonged to you. There was spiritual opposition too. Though not every difficult day came directly from spiritual attack, and not every delay came because darkness held power over your future. I remain sovereign, and nothing moves beyond what I allow. But there were moments when unseen opposition attempted to distort timing, weaken your hope, and convince you that your story had narrowed into disappointment only. There were whispers sent against your mind that sounded like your own conclusions. Perhaps nothing will change. Perhaps this prayer has become too late. Perhaps you hoped too long. Those whispers did not come from my heart toward you. They came to erode confidence slowly, because weakened hope often surrenders before fulfillment arrives. Spiritual opposition often seeks not only to stop outcomes, but to shape how you interpret waiting so that you abandon expectation too early. Yet even while those pressures touched your thoughts, I remained near, not absent, standing in authority over what could and could not cross into your future. You must also know that some wrong doors were being prevented while you grieved the doors you wanted opened. This part of your waiting often hurt deeply because from your side certain opportunities looked harmless, promising, even necessary. You saw a possible opening and thought perhaps this would finally end the long silence. You saw certain paths and believed perhaps this was the answer because it appeared to fit what you had prayed for. But not every open-looking path carried peace behind it. Some doors looked correct only because you could not yet see what stood beyond them. Some carried people who would have drained what I intended to strengthen. Some carried environments that would have shaped you away from what I had prepared. Some looked like breakthrough but actually held burdens hidden beneath attractive beginnings. So I prevented certain doors, not to increase your frustration, but because what looked good at the entrance did not remain good deeper inside. What you mourned as missed opportunity was often my hand quietly refusing to let you enter something that would later wound you more than the pain of waiting ever did. There were unseen dangers removed long before you recognized why certain things did not happen. You often asked me to explain immediately why something changed, why someone left, why plans failed, why expected outcomes dissolved without warning. But many removed dangers cannot be explained in full while you are still standing near them, because full explanation sometimes requires distance, maturity, and later perspective. There were conversations you never heard that would have altered your decisions if they had reached you too early. There were intentions around you not fully visible at the time. There were hidden motives inside certain people who smiled near you but carried confusion, envy, instability, or dishonesty that would have entered your next season if I had allowed full access too soon. There were also dangers inside timing itself, moments where even something good arriving too early would have attached itself to unstable circumstances and become heavy rather than holy. So removal often happened before understanding. Protection often came before explanation. Sometimes the unseen danger was not outside you but within unfinished healing inside you. There were seasons where certain blessings could have reached you, but old wounds still influenced how you would hold them. A fearful heart can mishandle even beautiful things because fear interprets blessing through suspicion. An exhausted heart can fail to enjoy what arrives because it still expects loss. A wounded heart may attach too tightly to what should be held with peace. I saw these inner dangers too. I saw where healing still needed time. I saw where previous disappointments still shaped your reactions. And because I love you, I did not allow certain things to arrive while those hidden inner dangers remained stronger than your present awareness of them. Divine timing also had to be protected. Timing is not simply about a calendar. Timing includes people, maturity, place, readiness, protection, and what must happen around you before what belongs to you can enter safely. Many times you prayed as though the answer depended only on your readiness, but divine timing often reaches far beyond one person's present desire. Some things required another person elsewhere to move first. Some answers depended on situations changing in places you could not observe. Some future alignments required one closed chapter before another could begin. While you waited, I protected timing carefully because if timing is disturbed too early, even true things can arrive under unnecessary strain. That is why certain days that felt painfully ordinary still mattered in heaven. What looked like another slow day to you often preserved larger arrangements beyond your sight. There were also moments when I allowed delay because your spirit needed one more season of strengthening before what came next could remain stable. If timing had opened while your inner life still leaned heavily on immediate reassurance, you would have entered the new season still fragile in ways that would later shake you deeply. But hidden strengthening continued while you thought only waiting was happening. Endurance formed quietly. Discernment sharpened quietly. The ability to stay calm without immediate signs deepened quietly. All of this became part of divine timing because timing is never only about when something appears. Timing is also about whether what appears can remain healthy once received. My child, much of what I fought while you waited never announced itself because if you had seen every detail, fear might have overwhelmed you instead of strengthened you. If I had shown you every wrong intention near your life, every unseen resistance, every prevented danger, every conflict touching your future, you might have become consumed with anxiety rather than trust. So I often protected you without explaining everything immediately. I stood where you could not stand. I answered things before they reached you fully. I closed paths before you understood why they suddenly became impossible. I delayed answers when timing still needed protection. I allowed some confusion temporarily because clarity too early would have exposed details not yet useful for your peace. And even when you felt forgotten, I remained active around every layer of what concerned you. I fought battles around your future that you never even knew existed. I prevented losses you never counted because they never became visible enough for you to name them. I blocked certain voices from gaining lasting influence. I removed certain dangers before they fully formed. I held timing steady when pressure around you tried to rush what needed deeper preparation. So now, when you look back at waiting, do not see only empty days. See also the invisible defense, the guarded doors, the hidden removals, the protected alignments, and the authority that stood over your future even while your eyes saw only silence. What felt quiet to you was often the very place where unseen victories were already taking shape long before visible answers appeared. My child, there were many times you stood before me asking why the door remained closed when your heart felt ready, when your prayers were sincere, when your desire seemed pure, and when everything inside you said that what you were asking for would finally bring relief. You looked at the closed place and thought the only thing missing was permission. Only one movement, only one answer, only one opening that would allow your life to step into what you had imagined for so long. But I saw something deeper than your desire, and because I saw deeper, I did not respond only to the urgency of your request. I responded to the condition of what stood within you, to the hidden places still being shaped, to the strength still forming quietly beneath the surface, to the areas where your heart still needed building before what you desired could rest there safely. What you begged me to open would have become too heavy for who you were then. It does not mean your longing was wrong. It means your inner life had not yet reached the strength required to carry what looked beautiful from a distance, but carried greater weight than you understood. You often believed that because you wanted something deeply, you were ready for it fully. But desire and readiness are not the same thing. Desire can rise quickly because pain makes relief feel urgent, because loneliness makes companionship feel necessary, because uncertainty makes opportunity feel like rescue, because tiredness makes breakthrough feel like survival. Yet readiness grows slower. Readiness requires roots. Readiness requires hidden stability. Readiness requires parts of your heart becoming strong enough not only to receive but also to remain steady after receiving. There were seasons when your prayers sounded mature, but inwardly your emotions still moved too sharply with every change around you. One good day lifted you high, and one difficult day pulled you low. One encouraging sign gave you peace, and one silence returned you to questioning. I saw that your heart still depended too heavily on immediate signs to remain steady. So before I opened the door, I strengthened the part of you that had to learn how to stand even when feelings changed. Inner strength had to come first because without inner strength, blessing often becomes another place where fear hides instead of peace. Inner strength does not form in comfort alone. It forms when you continue walking through days that do not immediately reward you, when you carry unanswered questions and still rise again, when you feel uncertain yet refuse to surrender entirely to despair. The days you thought were empty often became the days where strength quietly developed. Every time you remained after disappointment instead of withdrawing completely, strength deepened. Every time you chose to pray even when prayer felt heavy, strength deepened. Every time you sat in silence and still did not fully abandon me, strength deepened. You were not always aware that strength was forming because strength rarely announces itself while it grows. Often you notice it only later, when something that once would have broken you no longer carries the same power. That is why some seasons felt longer than you wanted, because what I was building inside you required more than one moment of comfort. It required repeated opportunities for hidden strength to become part of who you are. Right, Holy Spirit, fill me with your fire if you're hungry for His power. And share this video.